She's not even combat fit. Why is she still wearing the uniform? The words weren't meant to hurt, but they did. Leona heard them from behind the infirmary curtain, her ankle still bandaged, her face turned away from the hum of careless voices. A junior corporal laughed, boots squeaking on the tile. Probably just here to sort the mail. She didn't respond, didn't argue, just stared at the small radio clutched in her hand, an old field transmitter from her father's service, dusty, silent, forgotten. Until that one morning, weeks later, when it crackled to life. And across a scrambled foreign frequency, a voice whispered her name, not to mock it, but to surrender to it. If you believe respect should be earned, not given, and that quiet strength speaks loudest in the end, like and subscribe. Because this is the story of the woman they called dead weight, until she carried them all. They had always said she moved too slow, that her limp was a liability, her silence suspicious, her steady habits a signal of someone too careful to lead, too broken to follow. Just background noise in a place filled with bravado and barked commands. Sergeant Leona Hale wasn't supposed to be in the field anymore, at least not according to her squad. She was a 32-year-old comms specialist with a reconstructed Achilles, a decade of service, and no appetite for war stories or locker room heroics. She arrived at Forward Operating Base Tarkir just as summer turned the Afghan winds into sand-blown blades, her arrival unannounced, her duffel stitched quiet. The first morning, she was left off the convoy list. Paperwork lack, they said. The second, she fixed the signal relay after 2 engineers failed to. No one thanked her. By the third, the nicknames began. Postcard, Patch, Deadweight. Corporal Denon was the loudest, desert-hardened, smug, the kind of soldier who made war look like sport. Hope the Taliban sends her a welcome mat. He smirked during morning drills as Leona fell behind, sweat carving silent lines down her temple. She didn't flinch. She never did. While the squad shot rounds and took selfies in formation, she cleaned the backup transceiver no one used. While others slept, she scanned local frequencies, catching static and patterns others couldn't hear. Her father had taught her the language, not just Pashto, but the deeper language. Cadence, repetition, code inside code. He was a linguist turned spook, turned silence. She inherited the silence. Her notebook was her closest companion, not a diary, but a ledger of sounds, strange broadcasts, repeated numbers, tonal shifts that danced just under the radar. Lieutenant Ramirez noticed. A quiet observer herself, she began stopping by Leona's comms room during late hours. They didn't talk much, but Ramirez started asking questions. Real ones. Why did you underline that frequency? Why timestamp every pause? Leona never bragged, never explained. She simply turned the page and kept listening. Then one night, while the base slept and the moon hummed low like an omen, Leona intercepted something strange. A garbled sequence in Pashto, flanked by English numerals and what sounded like a name, hers. Not a full name, not Sergeant Hale, just Leona. She played it back 3 times, then wrote it down and circled it in red. She brought it to Denon at breakfast. He didn't even look up from his tray. Yeah, maybe your fan club's tuning in. Enjoy it. But Leona wasn't looking for approval. She just needed someone to believe that what she heard wasn't ghosts or echoes. It was a signal. She submitted the audio through command protocols. No reply. She logged it again. No escalation. No acknowledgement. And yet, 3 nights later, another ping. The voice of Hale. Let her speak. In Pashto again. Calm, reverent, not taunting, requesting. Still, they brushed her off. Insurgents playing with the scanners, Denton said. Just noise. But Hale knew the difference. She didn't speak often, but when she did, it was never for nothing. That week, the squad was dispatched to the Koe-Safed ridgeline. Routine recon, minimal risk. Leona wasn't invited. Too slow to run, too smart to shoot, Denton said. Let her babysit the radio tower. So she stayed, alone, until they didn't check in, until the base lost visual and audio at 0400, until GPS stuttered and SATCOM flatlined, until the only sound left, at 4:11 a.m., was that same calm voice on that same quiet frequency, this time saying just one line. We have them. We will wait for her. Her name. Spoken again, but not as a threat, as a condition. They didn't believe her. Not the officers, not the tech crew, and certainly not her squad, who were now off-grid somewhere beyond the eastern ridge, supposedly conducting a sweep and clear in Zone Echo, a zone Leona had flagged 2 days earlier in her notebook as a probable ambush corridor based on intercepted comms. But her warning, like every warning before, had been waved off like a mosquito. "We've got better intel," Denon had said, adjusting his chest rig like a game day jersey. "Let the eggheads play with radios. We'll handle the real work." Now, it was 4:29 a.m. and the tower was dark. No satellite ping, no check-in, no heat sigs on infrared. Just radio silence. And one message, now pulsing on repeat across an old frequency band no one else had monitored in years. Leona sat bolt upright, her hand hovering over the dial as the words played again, slow and clear. "We have them. We are waiting. For Hale. Not America. Not command. Not the officer." They asked for her, by name. She turned to Lieutenant Ramirez, who had arrived moments earlier in response to the signal anomaly. The lieutenant stared at the waveform printout, and then back at Leona. "This isn't a drill, is it?" Leona didn't answer. She didn't need to. The hum of the comms room was deafening now. She radioed command again. No reply. She requested permission to pursue. Denied. She requested again. "Do not leave post." But her squad was already 5 miles into contested terrain, and the only sound coming from that direction was the sound of people who hadn't fired a shot yet, and were somehow still trapped. She stood. "I'm going," she said. Ramirez didn't stop her, just nodded once and pressed a keycard into her palm. "Take the rover. Use comms manually. I'll cover the report." 15 minutes later, the outpost gate slid open with a low groan as Leona, alone, unescorted, drove east into the dark, dust slicing through her headlights like spectral claws. She wasn't a field agent. Not anymore. Her limp ached with every gear shift. But she knew the maps. She knew the terrain. And more than that, she knew the voices. As she approached the ridge, her old transmitter crackled again. She pulled over and calibrated it manually, fingers moving with the steadiness of someone who wasn't guessing, who'd been trained by silence itself. "We will not harm," the voice said. "But we do not speak to liars. Send Hale." She whispered back in fluent Pashto, her accent so precise it startled even her, clean, ancestral, like her father's. "I'm listening," she said. "Then we will come," they replied. She waited, crouched behind the console in the stillness of pre-dawn, and at 5:04 a.m., 2 figures emerged from the tree line, unarmed, hands raised. Insurgents. No weapons. One carried a white cloth, the universal code. Leona stepped out slowly, lowering her scarf. "You asked for me," she said in Pashto. The older man nodded. "We intercepted your voice 3 weeks ago. It matched the one who once taught peace here. Ishak Hale." She froze. Her father's name, his real name, not the one on his NATO badge, but the one the tribes knew, the one that carried weight in villages where war never stopped. "He is gone," she said. "Then we speak to the one who carries his sound," the man replied. "We are tired. We will surrender. But not to him." He nodded toward the direction of her squad. "Only to you." She asked where the soldiers were. "Safe. Surrounded. But not harmed. We knew if we waited, you would come." Leona called it in to Ramirez. She insisted they come unarmed. A ceasefire was struck, not from the top down, but from the ground up, in a dirt clearing 5 miles from anyone who had ever seen her as more than radio static. When the squad was escorted back, dazed and blinking, they expected gunfire, maybe a drone strike. What they saw was Leona standing in the center of a loose semicircle, insurgents seated calmly in the sand around her, her father's transmitter lying between them. Denton's face twisted first in confusion, then something close to shame. "What the hell is this?" he asked. One of the insurgents looked at him without recognition. "We were told not to shoot," he said in broken English. "Only to wait for Hale." Leona didn't speak. She simply turned back to the conversation at hand, switching seamlessly between dialects, confirming coordinates, laying out surrender terms. She didn't bark, didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. She was fluent in something louder than command. Respect. And for the first time since stepping onto that base, her voice wasn't background noise. It was the only thing they could hear. They didn't know what to say, not the insurgents who laid down their rifles in cautious resignation, Not the squad who stumbled into the open clearing blinking in disbelief, and certainly not Corporal Denton, whose last insult still hung somewhere in the back of his throat, unspoken and now impossible to justify. Leona Hale stood at the center of it all, not with a weapon drawn, not with rank declared, but with her presence, a presence shaped not by loud orders or swaggering tales but by the quiet force of someone who knew how to listen when no one else did. The surrender wasn't negotiated by brass or drones or any of the endless firepower stacked behind the American lines. It was done on her voice alone, on a name spoken softly into the dust. Pale. Not even Sergeant Hale. Just Pale. The call to cease fire had already rippled through local channels by the time command arrived. Eyes scanning for the firefight that never happened. The insurgents, 10 in total, including 2 senior tacticians, sat in a semicircle beneath the dawn, heads bowed, weapons dismantled and lined in front of them. And there she was, notebook in her lap, transmitter humming, her boots dusted in red clay, still listening, still calm. General Whitley himself landed 2 hours later by chopper, flanked by aides and command photographers ready to spin up a press statement about unorthodox diplomacy and field initiative. But the closer he got, the more unsure he looked. One of his aides whispered, "Sir, the surrender wasn't to the platoon. It was to her." The general frowned. "Her rank?" "Come, Sergeant, 4th class." The aide swallowed. "But they requested her by name, sir." Whitley approached slowly, clearing his throat. "Sergeant Hale," he said, as if tasting the words for the first time. "May I have a word?" She stood, wiped her palms, and nodded. Of course. But she didn't salute, not out of disrespect, but because, for once, she was the one being met. He asked her what happened. She told him, and clipped, honest sentences. No embellishment. No victory dance. Just truth. A voice that remembered her father's cadence, a pattern and enemy speech that no one else heard, a quiet approach when others would have kicked down doors. "And you brokered this?" the general asked. "Alone?" Leona nodded once. "No," she said. "They did. I just listened long enough to answer." That night, a report was filed to NATO command, not titled with coordinates or unit ID, but with a subject line that made every desk officer pause mid-scroll. Enemy requested specific U.S. soldier for surrender. Name, Pale. At the base, something shifted. The next morning, the bench outside the comms room was full for the first time: junior officers, fresh cadets, a medic with a spiral notepad. No one spoke. They just listened, watched, took notes the way she always had. Ramirez started logging her signal maps as priority intercepts. Command rerouted satellite ears to the frequency she'd identified. And Denton? He approached her one morning with a sheepish look and a scar on his cheek from where he'd tripped during exfil. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "But I do owe you one hell of a salute." She looked up from her notebook, scanned him briefly, then said, "Save it. Just try listening next time." It wasn't bitter. It wasn't cold. Just measured. He saluted anyway. 2 weeks later, a ceremony was held, not a medal pinning, not a photo op, but something stranger, a renaming. The central relay tower at FB Tarker, once known as Charlie Post 7, was repainted overnight. At sunrise, in crisp, bold lettering, it read, "Pale Station." No speech, no ribbon, just a plaque beneath it, simple and spare, for the one who heard what we couldn't. She didn't ask for it. She never would have. But when she passed it that morning, on her way to recalibrate the sideband relay, she paused just long enough to smile, just a little. Her father's transmitter, now refurbished and mounted beside the desk, continued to hum gently, tuned not to broadcast orders but to monitor whispers, because those whispers had saved lives. Back home, the story spread slowly at first, then all at once. Veterans forums lit up. "You hear about Hale?" some asked. "The woman who got 10 fighters to lay down arms with one sentence?" Military analysts wrote think pieces. Podcasts dissected her cadence, her timing. The Army didn't know whether to promote her or study her. But she didn't need the noise. She just needed her booth, her radio, and the trust to hear what others ignored. On her last day before redeployment, she handed her notebook to a new recruit, Private Liam, 19, wiry, eager, and half her speed on signal translation. "Don't look for volume," she told him. "Look for repetition. That's where the truth hides." He nodded as if receiving ancient scripture. After she left, the base never treated the comms tower the same again. Not just because of what she'd done, but because they knew, deep down, that they almost missed her. Almost lost 10 men. Almost sparked a war. All because they didn't listen. But someone did. And her name, now whispered, now etched, now remembered, was Hale,